Hello and welcome back to Kerbal Fuel Crisis. If you're unfamiliar with this series, it is where the Kerbals have run out of rocket fuel, so we have to mine all the fuel we ever use on this program with kethane mod. Before I started, I just want to say I am a huge Total Biscuit fan, and after watching his latest vlog, I just wanted to say that in the off chance that he ever sees this video, all my thoughts do go to him. Anybody else who is a fan, go watch his latest vlog. It will explain some of what I'm talking about. I don't want to go into details, just since I am a big fan and I also do YouTube videos, I wanted to mention that. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, we join Kershus Kerman on his way back to the planet. When last we saw him, he was docked with the refueling station in orbit, dropping off some extra fuel that he had from his trip, because we really shouldn't need that much to get back down. Really, it's just going to be using the air-breathing engine after we re-enter the atmosphere to get back to the KSC. Unfortunately, we did mistime our deorbiting maneuver and lost some footage, which is why we're joining as he's lowering down. To be perfectly honest with you, we did mistime our burn, so I think that we may overshoot the KSC. Hopefully not too far, because we did have very limited fuel reserves. But given that this plane is very fuel efficient, especially with the air-breathing engine, it's only got a single jet, we hope that this should be enough to get us back. It's very light, single jet engine, should be pretty fuel efficient. Now just re-entering the atmosphere in these planes is always very, very tricky, at least for me. I've always found it difficult to control the level of deceleration without it flipping the plane over. It may just be something wrong with my designs that I've always found they tend to go into either some sort of flip or flat spin. This particular design seems to be working fairly well though. Just keep it at more or less a straight prograde angle. I blanked on my grades there for a minute. A straight prograde angle just coming into the atmosphere to keep everything more or less level. The plane is naturally aerodynamic that direction. And I really do wish there was a way to check the center of mass in flight. I know it's not hugely realistic when you're outside of the build menu, but would be very, very useful. Maybe something you could put on a space station even. Some sort of immobile platform that you could, would be very difficult to put on a in-flight aircraft, but that you could have on a docked station so you could check on your fuel consumption and things like that. Just an idea. Pay attention, modders. That could be gold. Anyway, we have overshot by quite a bit. The continent that we are currently over is the one directly across from the KSC. You can actually see our old mining location over to the left there. If you look out the left-hand side of the plane, you may see our old kethane mining base, which no longer exists in this timeline. We do have a lot of temporal hopping going on. So we did have to engage the engines, just to keep everything stable in this turn. We probably didn't necessarily need them because we are going well above Mach 2 at this point, but just to keep everything stable while we go through the turn, definitely did not want to stall out because of this banking. And we're actually completely sideways to the air that we are entering at orbital velocities from this side. Thankfully it is only high suborbital speeds, as opposed to if we were coming in from someplace like, say, interplanetary, would be a much harder entry. Someone did mention air braking. Oh, I had a couple of people mention air braking, actually. One person mentioned in the comments when one of my friends told me that I was stupid not to do it. I did completely forget about air braking in the last episode. I have to pay more attention to that. I seem to be forgetting some of my spacebound play skills since I've been spending so long fine-tuning my in-atmosphere flying skills. So, Virtutes is on his way back to the base, and we have nearly run out of fuel. You can see we only have 80 whatever units that is, unmarked fuel units. We only have 80 of those left in our engines. So currently we're gliding in. And gliding in should not be very difficult at this point. largely because the plane was pretty stable to begin with. We are coming in at a fairly high speed. We're still going under 100 meters a second, even just gliding. And we've only just now entered the thick part of the atmosphere. Unfortunately, the plane does become quite difficult to control. Even turning the engine on doesn't seem to help very much. I don't know what it is. It seems that around 100 meters a second we seem to hit some sort of unfortunate instability in the aircraft. And we have now gone into a spin and dive. The dive should, though, help us to get out of this situation if we can control it properly. But even with RCS, this is very, very difficult to control. We just need to get back into going straight down and level the plane off. But right now the spinning is very, very unfortunate, and I don't know if we're going to be able to pull out of this. And we now crash into the sea. So first space flight did not go well on the return. And now, since this is our first space flight and our first casualty, we're going to immortalize his name. It is very unfortunate that we have lost poor Curtius Kerman, but he will forever be remembered in our histories, with his name misspelled in a very Kerbal-esque manner. But the first Kerbal on the moon, and I believe we didn't even actually put a flag down. Disappointing. But even with such a soul-shattering loss, life at the KSC must go on. And with a full space mission and a fuel satellite launched into orbit, it's about time that we got some more fuel. Now, this is a little trick that I don't know if I've shown very often, since it's very difficult to actually get the fuel tanks to line up properly on the side of the ship. I will often put them on in the front or very near the back, and that way that I can put things on the front and back of them without having to use the part editor or things of that nature. This I did allow clipping just because you know how things can get when you're trying to use symmetry in these things, and sometimes you just have to turn clipping on to get those things to attach properly. Because, you know, I don't consider that cheating, because you know if I'd put that on as one piece, it would have come on fine. But since I was trying to put on that one air intake, it wasn't going to work at all. So that's why I don't think it's cheating. That's the justification to myself at any rate. Now, our goal here is to design what I hope to be the last fuel carrier we need to design. I really just want something that's large, can carry a lot of fuel in a stroke, and is very, very fast at doing it. Because you know we're going to have to make a few more fuel runs on Kerbin before everything is said and done. And I'd very much like to just have a standard workhorse carrier that we can send out to the mining base and have come back with very little trouble. And I'm hoping that this one is it. Even looking at it now, I can see a couple of things that could become design flaws. But we're going to send it on a test run, nonetheless. Bobine and Hacken. I swear some of these names are just random. Herkin? I don't know. Some of these names, I swear, are just random associations of letters. But hopefully this thing will work fine. I actually put 2 sets of the huge wings on to give it just that extra bit of lift. It's going to be way overkill for how it is now with the fuel tanks empty, but once we pick up 2 large tanks full of kethane, this thing is going to weigh a ton. Well, it probably already weighs several tons. I didn't check the mass, but you know what I mean. Now, the angle that the landing gear are at, creating a slight upslope on the wings as it's going down the runway, actually allow it to take off by itself after only a few feet, which is something that I hope to replicate when we're on the ground at the campsite, or at the mining base, not the campsite, excuse me. We're going camping now, which should bring marshmallows. We're bringing a vital supply of marshmallows out to the mining base, because they must be running dangerously low at this point. Yes. So, good takeoff and landing ability is something incredibly important on these cargo planes, because they're landing on non-smooth terrain. This is a lot smoother than what we had at the last base, but it's still quite hilly. And since I've been unable to use ground scatter, you may see it here and there throughout the videos. I keep experimenting with it and trying to get it to go, but it interferes with one of my mods in some way and keeps causing the thing to freeze, which is not ideal at all, though I'd really love to have it on. But without ground scatter, it's almost impossible to see a lot of these small hills and things that are at the base. They just blend in to the landscape much too well, if you ask me. But we're able to land this thing alright, which I wasn't too worried about on the trip here, because the chassis is so light without any fuel. The other thing that I'm really worried about is the ground clearance around all these hills. You saw that I have a set of engines underneath to give it the full 4, and I'm very worried that that combined with the way the landing legs worked out, the landing gear, excuse me, the way the landing gear worked out, have made the plane ride quite low to the ground as far as those engines are concerned. And the last thing we need is to have 2 engines blow out on the takeoff, which would constantly be driving the plane down into the ground. Would not be very helpful at all. But we won't know that until we try, because it is impossible to test these things with full kethane containers. I suppose that we could refill them from the kethane reserves we have at the base, but then if we crashed a prototype, we would lose all of our stored kethane, so that's really more of a risk than I want to go into. I would much rather lose a shipment than lose something that we already have stored at base. So after a quick refuel and loading up the tanks with the precious kethane, we can just make a quick trip back to base. We've done this several times before, so I won't show you all of it, but really the only trick that I've found that can at all help is to spool up your engines beforehand, so you don't have to taxi very much. This did have to taxi a lot more than I was hoping for, partially because I was unable to test it with the weight, and this did add a huge amount of weight. You'll notice that we have the 2 full tanks on here, which is really kind of the standard for what I want to try to bring. I'm going to have to experiment with some other ways to bring things there and back. We did lose the outermost control surfaces on the wings, but those control surfaces were really serving very little purpose. It was a little extra nudge that it got us, but really nothing that important that we couldn't afford to lose. So if something had to be lost on takeoff, I'm glad it was that. Really, rather than our engines or our crew or our cockpit, you know, any of those things. And in a rare turn of events, we are actually able to land on the runway. I know, I can't remember the last time that I actually landed on the runway instead of just coming in at a weird angle with low fuel and landing wherever the heck we were able to. Which is nice, especially with all the things that we have to load at the end of the runway, causing that terrible stutter time freeze. But exactly what I was worried about happens here. We lost our entire undercarriage, both engines and all their associated fuel tanks and air intakes. Thankfully it happened here. Now we just know that we do need a redesign instead of having to lose all of our fuel. So this, unfortunately, is the last flight of this particular carrier craft. But that's okay, because it did get us the fuel reserves back that we needed. I'm going to be experimenting a lot with planes and space planes, because those are very fuel efficient in these circumstances. I would like it though. People let me know if there's any interesting things that you think of. Right now I'm working a lot with space planes and thinking about some other rocket designs. I might do the balloon rocket again, even though that felt a little cheaty even to me, but I wanted to use it to get that satellite up because we really needed that satellite in orbit. But barring that, anything interesting you guys think of, I'd love to hear it, because, you know, creativity is fun. Even if you want to send me a save file, I'll play with it. Might come into an episode. Anyway, we shall now simply be transferring the kethane out of our plane and into our mobile converter here. We're going to use this converter as a go-between, and I'm still not sure why that wheel keeps breaking. But we're going to be using this converter as a go-between base, basically. we're going to hook one into the plane, one into the fuel tanks, and then use the converter that is on board this in order to convert our fuel, kethane into fuel, excuse me, in order to convert our kethane into fuel and be able to get it into our large storage tanker that we are going to be driving around to refuel our aircraft, or spacecraft rather. We don't nearly need to use it to refuel our aircraft. That'd be a bit of a waste at base. Now that everything has been done, we are hooking up the second iteration of our space plane. While poor Kirkus, I'm never going to be able to say his name right, while poor Kirkus Kerman did die, apparently, though either his identical twin who took his name, his clone, or some sort of weird temporal identical match has somehow appeared in the cockpit of this plane. I don't know why that is. I swear to you, I did not do anything. I didn't mess with the save files. You can see the flag is still over there. Nothing untoward happened. He just suddenly appeared in this plane. We're either going to call it a clone or a miracle. You know, clone, robot, or long-lost twin. Take your bets. After successful refueling of whoever it is his ship, all we need to do is clear the runway. So ground crew takes the Firefly crew transport, which I'm still going to get to space, off the park, and we'll just park it here. I swear I didn't plan this. Yeah, that middle section is a completely empty fuel tank, so that makes the thing way lighter than it looks and lets it do whatever this is. Good parking job, guys. Now, the new spaceplane design has several features that will become apparent throughout, but the main things that we learned are, one, don't put the solar panels on the sides, because putting them on the edges of the wings like that just made them too exposed, and with one broken solar panel on one launch, I did not want to risk a second one. These things have to be rock solid because there is no opportunity to repair. Ideally, once Curtius 2 takes off here, he is not going to be returning. Alright, now that's not to say that I hope him dead, though he already has died once, so who knows. But the ideal situation for this aircraft is going to explore. It's going to be our initial scout craft. It's going to stay out in the extra-Kerbal worlds. Alright, first thing it's going to do is go to Minmus, because that is the body closest that we have yet to scan. But instead of sending out satellites, I'm just going to have this thing go to Minmus, find a patch, land, refuel itself. It'll be able to get back into orbit, and hopefully have enough Delta V on there that'll be able to break Kerbal's sphere of influence and move on to the next planet that we want to explore. That way we'll be able to scan for fuel with a self-refueling, endlessly reusable aircraft that we don't need to redesign much, because any planet that's gravity is too heavy for its nuclear engine to work on should have some sort of atmosphere that'll allow it to land more easily with its wings. That's the theory anyway. The other thing that we learned, aside from having to keep breakable bits higher up on the craft, is that we put some landing gear on the back that, when deployed, should extend further than the engines. That way this thing won't have to land on its engines. You know, same problem with that. If one of these engines breaks off, the air-breathing engines wouldn't be as bad, because then we could still use it to land in vacuum, but then it would be almost impossible to return to Kerbin, which we could get around, to be honest with you. But it would make it unbalanced, and it would make it very difficult for it to be useful, and it would then only be able to work on vacuum planets. It wouldn't be able to function on atmosphere planets, because that nuclear engine, as efficient as it is, can't push it very well in atmosphere, and it would use up too much fuel. This thing carries extra liquid fuel specifically for those air-breathing engines, so not being able to use one would be lacking. Also, we put 2 on this design, because I just wasn't getting the thrust I wanted with 1. It does lead to the problem of having asymmetrical burnouts, but we were able to get enough intakes on this thing that it was able to get up into a very, very high atmosphere. That's another thing we learned. We put air intakes all over this thing. You see that it can get 17 air in total, which is a huge amount if you haven't tried building space planes before. Air intakes are the key. You want to be able to get into as thin of atmosphere as possible and get going as fast as you can before you have to engage your non-air breathing engine. This thing was actually able to get up to nearly, actually was able to get up to pretty much full orbital speed using only the air breathing engines. And then we switch over to the nuclear engine when we start to get our burnouts. I want to start being more careful with that, especially on this craft, because an asymmetrical burnout can send you on a flat spin, and after you spent 20 minutes getting up into the atmosphere, that's a bit of a pain. The other thing, I'd forgotten about this, the other thing that we learned and have since implemented is poor Curtius 1 would have been fine if not for the lack of an escape pod. And while I could just build stock escape pods into every craft, 1, I'd forget, 2, it adds a bunch of weight, 3, it sounds really tedious, and 4, there's a cool mod that lets my kerbals have parachutes. So we just installed that, and that is what that small yellow thing is on the top of the ship, is the ejection seat mod, which is fun and interesting to use. I'd definitely recommend it. It only works well in atmosphere. I think that it can eject outside of the atmosphere, but then where are you? Outside of the atmosphere, nothing really you can do. So, after a quick and easy transfer, we have made it to Minmus with a relatively large amount of delta V left. You can see there that I've still got over 1,000 delta V. It should take about 80 delta V to slow myself down enough for landing from orbit, according to many guides that I've read. So more than 1,000 should be plenty. Now, we just have to simply move the craft into the near polar. I'm done going for complete polar orbits. It's a waste of fuel, honestly. We never will have a situation where we want to land on one of the poles. Even if there is kethane there, landing on the poles is just so difficult for intercepts and anything else you'd want to do with that fuel. So avoiding polar scans is really just a good time saver, and it saves fuel. And now, I know this episode turned out a little bit short, but I honestly couldn't think of another meaningful thing to do. I would much rather end the episode here, have it be a little bit short, and have it be a victory. We've now made it to Minmus with our only casualty thus far in the series. So, I'd rather leave it here than try to tack on an extra fuel run or something insignificant. I hope that you very much enjoyed. I am loving everybody's comments. I have been taking your mod suggestions. I unfortunately wasn't able to integrate any of the ones from this last week because I was running into some problems getting them working, but I'm happy to take mod suggestions, ship suggestions, what the heck to do next suggestions, anything you feel like, really. I really hope you enjoy. You can tune in tomorrow for a speed build that I'm going to be doing in Planet Explorers. Not exactly sure what I'm building yet, but I'm enjoying doing those even if no one else is enjoying watching it. I'm going to keep doing them regardless. You can't stop me. Other than that, my name's Gepwin. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.